What's up, everybody? My name is Jeffrey Gardner. Welcome back once again to another episode of Upset Alert. It is episode number 63 of the Ultimate College Football Podcast, celebrating all 130 teams in FBS. Now, of course, this season we are doing that with the caveat that only 76 teams, as everything currently stands, will be taking place in the fall football season in FBS. But nonetheless, we're soldiering on here. We are continuing our march toward the number one team in college football. I want to start by apologizing for a extended delay. I misspoke last episode, a couple days ago, when I said that we would just be taking Wednesday off this week. I miscalculated on my part, so we had Wednesday and Thursday off this week, but we're back here today on a Friday afternoon as I record at about 5:30 p.m. live on twitch.tv/robotbraineater. If you do want to join in the conversation live for any of our episodes, please do give us a follow on Twitch at twitch.tv/robotbraineater. You can hop in the chat live, and I'll be happy to read your comments out as I record the show. For those of you who are listening later on, of course, we're available on all your podcast services of choice, but we'll talk about all of that a little bit later. For now, we are here to continue our countdown to number one and previewing every game on the college football schedule for this 2020 season. So, what we have done to this point, of course, we've been ranking every team in college football worst to first. We have made our way all the way through number 5, and we are now getting into the top 4 teams in college football, at least according to our preseason ranking for this 2020 season. So at number 4 today, and as you see the Oklahoma highlights play live on Twitch, for those of you watching us live in the chat here, Oklahoma was actually number 5 on our ranking. That's a team, of course, that made the college football playoff last season. But at number 4, we are talking about none other than the defending national champions, the LSU Tigers. Love purple, live gold. We are headed down to Baton Rouge to preview every single game of the 2020 season for the defending national champs. So this should be a fun one. This one should be a lot of fun, I think. We are just talking about a really, really great football team and a team that has a lot of questions to answer, quite frankly. After some of the best players in program history, maybe in college football history, just just left their program over the offseason, headed to the NFL, of course. So it'll be interesting to see how this LSU program responds after a national championship win, a near flawless season, and how this team really can continue to push forward under head coach Ed Orgeron without guys like Joe Brady, their passing game coordinator from before, without Joe Burrow, of course, they're all pro essentially already quarterback. We're ready already, it seems, to crown him the NFL MVP. Yeah, it should be really exciting. And so we'll jump into it. First, we're going to relive some memories. So for all you LSU fans out there checking out today's episode, we are going to take to memory lane and relive happy days here. LSU in 2019 was 15-0. Simply put, that it doesn't get any better than that. So this was a perfect record for LSU in 2019, and it was a near perfect season in every single facet. It just simply doesn't get any better than that. The national champions, of course, the SEC champions, lots of quality wins along the way. So let's take a look into this 20 schedule here and see what LSU did just game by game. It makes it even more impressive, I think, looking into how they got there. So they started things off August 31st. They won 55-3 versus Georgia Southern. That just doesn't seem fair right there. Texas 45-38. So they won at number 9, Texas 45-38. That was a close one right there. So this was actually a great game early in the season when we thought Texas might be more of a contender when they turned out to be later on in the season. This was a good Texas Longhorn team as far as talent goes, and they really held their own against LSU early in the year. Maybe you can make the argument there that they got LSU before they really became the monster that they ultimately did. Um, but nonetheless, it was a close game on September 7th, which seems like an eternity ago at this point. Northwestern State on here, an FCS opponent, of course, again. That almost just doesn't even seem fair for the level of talent that this LSU team had last season. They won that one 65-14, 66-38 at Vanderbilt. So actually gave up a good number of points to the Commodores there, but dropped a 66 piece on them. Against Utah State in out of conference play, a 42-6 win there for the Tigers, a 42-28 win versus number 7 Florida. That one was actually close for most of the game as well. One of Florida's best performances in the entire season, I would say. LSU, though, of course, winds up coming out on top still by 2 scores. A 36-13 win at Mississippi State, so they don't quite put up the crazy point totals there, but still pick up a nice win on the road. A 23-20 win versus Auburn, actually their closest game of the regular season here, so just won by a field goal in Death Valley. This was really a test, I think, for LSU because looking just at any team that goes undefeated, any national champion, or you could even just say any team with a schedule in their conference as tough as LSU is playing in the toughest division in all of college football, the SEC West. That is, at least in my opinion. So obviously, any team like that with a schedule like that is going to be tested at some point. Even those undefeated teams with a less tough schedule, someone is going to put them to the test at some point during the season. LSU was tested mildly against Texas and against Florida last year, but this Auburn game really put them through the ringer, and they came out even better for it. So, so really, what you look at is an LSU Tigers team that I think by this point in the season was battle hardened and became nearly unbeatable headed into that big early November showdown at number 2 Alabama. Of course, they went on to win that one as well by a score of 46-41. So at this point, you really like their chances, right? Because it was at Ole Miss and versus Arkansas to close out the regular season before versus Texas A&M in that regular season finale. So 58-37 win at Ole Miss, 56-20 versus Arkansas, and then a 50-7 blowout against Texas A&M. And really coming into the postseason for LSU, the vibe that I had at least, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, is that there were 2 teams on everyone's lips in college football at the end of the regular season. Those were LSU and Ohio State. Those teams were near perfect for the regular seasons. They were just so darn good. They were beating teams up. They were scoring so many points every single game that it was just hard to imagine anyone beating LSU or Ohio State. Of course, Clemson started to have that late season surge, so you start to hear chatter about them as well. And you have to put a 4th team in there. So Oklahoma was very good as well. Of course, they had a great year. I don't want to downplay that, but I don't think there was ever really a feeling that Oklahoma was on the same level as an LSU, an Ohio State, or a Clemson last year. So looking at this SEC championship game, and I'm going to tell you, as a Georgia Bulldog, I am a Georgia Bulldog alumnus, right? Looking at that SEC championship game, that the final score was 37-10, of course, where LSU beats Georgia in that game in Atlanta. that score is way closer than the game actually felt. To me, as a Georgia fan watching that game, LSU had complete control in this game, never lost it. Their offense was absolutely dominant. They essentially they didn't score at will. I will say that because Georgia had one of the best defenses in the entire country last season, but they scored, you know, plenty, plenty. Scoring 37 against that Georgia offense last year, you might as well have scored 70 because that offense just could not compete with an offense the caliber of LSU's. Georgia's defense carried them to most of their wins last season, at least carried the bulk of the weight. The offense did just enough more often than not. But this was a Georgia team that, just in terms of offensive firepower, did not even have half of what it took to compete with LSU on that day. And so you see the multi-score blowout there, 37-10. Like I said, really the game was not as close as 37-10. That game was an all-out rout on the part of the LSU Tigers. They just didn't choose to stomp Georgia into the mud quite that bad that day. Looking at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, as this team headed into the college football playoff, of course, they were the number one seed. How could you argue that? I mean, 13-0 with wins over Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Auburn, Texas A&M, so many wins. Texas in there as well from the out-of-conference schedule. It's hard to argue. Putting this team at the number one seed, and of course, they drew Oklahoma in the Peach Bowl, stomped a mud hole in them, right? 63-28. Oklahoma came back a little. They put a few points on the board late in this one to make it look closer than it was. LSU was, again, as dominant as they wanted to be in this football game. Oklahoma's defense was just outclassed on every single facet of the game. LSU's offense was running roughshod on them. LSU's defense was much better, it seemed, than Oklahoma's. Offense was able to put up that day, which is unusual for Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma's not used to scoring less than 40 points in a game, or at least less than 30, 35 points in a game. They're held to 28. They might be in trouble with the defense that they have. And against LSU's offense, it was big, big trouble as they gave up 63 there. Looking at Clemson, the national championship game, of course, from last year, again, it wasn't a particularly close game, 42-25. So you're talking multiple scores there. Um, it was a decent performance for Clemson. I mean, you can't fault Clemson. This obviously is an incredibly talented football team last year and coming into this year. Clemson recruits like almost no other team does in the country. So the talent level is there, the coaching is there, the scheming, everything like that is there. But this LSU team was simply something special last season, and I really just cannot fathom how anyone could have beaten this team last year, because you saw elite level teams go out there and give them their best shot, and it simply was not good enough. Look at Alabama, look at Georgia, look at Florida, look at Auburn. Those teams went out there, even Clemson you throw in there as well, in Oklahoma. I mean, when all was said and done, you are talking more than half of the top 10 teams in college football last season. LSU played and beat them. So that is just simply something that you cannot say about pretty much any team ever in college football. Just that level of difficulty on the scheduling, you don't really see much. And so, looking forward to this 2020 season, you wonder, is there anyone that can stop LSU? And the answer might be themselves, because this team has lost some key spots, right? I mean, let's call it like it is. You're talking about last season. The main conversation throughout the year is what is different about LSU this year from last year. Why did their offense take such leaps and bounds? Um, why did they improve so drastically? And you talk about Joe Brady as the passing coordinator last year. He's no longer there at LSU this year. Of course, he's up coaching in the NFL now. You had Joe Burrow at quarterback, who obviously had made some improvements as well. He's not there anymore. He's playing for the Cincinnati Bengals in the NFL. You have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was a breakout star at running back last season, who gave that offense balance so that you can't just key in on the pass play and, not defend the run. He, of course, had a great season as well, also now gone to the NFL. You even throw in there one of your top wide receivers like Justin Jefferson, who's also now gone to the NFL. So you're losing a lot of production, and let me just tell you how much production exactly LSU is losing for this upcoming season. We've got some stats pulled up here. Joe Burrow in 2019, for those of you who were living under a rock and maybe don't realize what exactly Joe Burrow did and how special it was, let's give you the side by side numbers here. 2018 Joe Burrow. This was a very good LSU team, but not a truly elite LSU team. Joe Burrow completed 57.8% of his passes in 2018. That was 219 completions of 379 attempts. Threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 2,894 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Averaged 7.6 yards per attempt. Those are pretty good numbers. Those are respectable numbers for a starting SEC quarterback. 2019, by comparison, now he did play 2 more games in 2019 because they made the playoff. He completed an outrageous 76.3% of his pass attempts, 402 for 527. So not only did he throw about 150 more passes in 2019, he completed 20% more of them. Threw for, hold on to something, 5,671 passing yards, 10.8 yards per attempt. So his yards per attempt go up over 3 yards. His total passing yards go up nearly 3,000 yards. His completion percentage goes up 19.5 points. And here's the ridiculous line where it gets really absurd. Remember, 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. How about 60 touchdowns and 6 interceptions? The throw's just one more interception. And how about quadrupling your touchdown total? That is just outrageous. I mean, just cuckoo numbers for Joe Burrow. And oh, by the way, doesn't get talked about a lot, but he also ran for 368 yards on the ground and 5 rushing touchdowns. He's not your Justin Fields type runner, but those are certainly some impressive numbers on the ground when you take into effect the absurdity of his passing numbers last season. Let's talk a little bit about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, though, junior running back who moved on to the NFL. The leap that he took from his sophomore to junior season, in his sophomore season, he played 13 games, so played in every game they played. 146 attempts, he ran for 658 yards. That's 4.5 yards per attempt. 7 rushing touchdowns, 96 yards receiving, no receiving touchdowns. 2019, all he did was more than double those numbers. 15 games, so again, 2 more games, 215 attempts, 1,414 yards on the ground, 6.6 yards per carry. That's over 2 yards better than the year prior. 16 touchdowns on the ground compared to 7 in 2018. 453 yards receiving compared to 96 the year prior. These are just outrageous jumps. This is the perfect storm of talent growing, new talent coming in, and a completely new scheme from a guy like Joe Brady last year, changing the offense at LSU. So, how much stock do you put into what has been installed is now there at LSU? And how much stock do you put into what was there last year was special? Let's see if they can carry that with different personnel. That is the question that determines how well you think LSU is going to perform in 2020. And the answer, I think, lies somewhere in between, right? Obviously, the guys that are there are still great, but they're not Joe Burrow great. They're not Clyde Edwards-Helaire great, I don't think. And whoever they've got calling the passing game this year, I don't think it's quite Joe Brady. So all that being said, there's still an absurd amount of talent on this football team. They've got Miles Brennan at quarterback now. They've still got running backs who have had a ton of experience. And their wide receiver core, as last year, is going to be very deep. They've still got a guy in Jamar Chase, who is going to be one of the best, if not the best, wide receivers in the country for 2020, despite the fact that Justin Jefferson left last season. So let's look down this schedule here, and I know I'm getting a little long-winded, but it's exciting talking about the defending national champions here. So September 26th versus Mississippi State. Leave your cowbells at home. LSU's rolling. Week 1. I think that's a pretty easy call there. That's Mike Leach's first game as the head coach at Mississippi State. Of course, he is an experienced head coach. Mississippi State's got a few years to go at least. That's assuming that they are even moving in the right direction, which I'm not positive on. But if they are moving in the right direction, they need at least a few years to right the ship in Starkville. That looks like a week 1 win for LSU. October the 3rd at Vanderbilt. LSU is getting an easy start to the season. They're 2-0. Vanderbilt is bad. Real bad. October the 10th versus Missouri. Poor Missouri. Let's just pull up real quick the SEC schedule real quick just so you guys can take a look, for those of you who are watching on video, at Missouri's schedule in 2020. We won't sidebar on this for too long, but Missouri is playing just about the toughest schedule of anyone in college football this year, I think. They play Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, Vanderbilt, Florida, Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. So out of the West, they do get Arkansas and Mississippi State, but they also get Alabama and LSU, plus the entire Eastern slate, which includes Georgia and Florida. That's a tough schedule for Missouri. I think you can make an argument that maybe Tennessee gets it a little tougher. They get Alabama, Texas A&M, and Auburn, in addition to Arkansas out of the West. But yeah, I digress. So we'll leave that alone there. Let's call it like it is. Tigers versus Tigers, October 10th. LSU Tigers will get the win. They're 3-0. October the 17th comes their first real test. This is a road game against Florida down in the swamp. Now, we just previewed Florida a couple of days ago when they popped up on our countdown, so you already know my feelings on this game if you've been listening to the show regularly. For those of you who haven't, it's LSU. I like LSU in this football game. I just love the way this LSU schedule lines up. They get 3 weeks, essentially, at the beginning of the year to get everything straightened out that they need to have straightened out before they play their first real test at Florida. I know it's a road game. I know this is a great cross-division rivalry game, and I really do think it's one of the better cross-division annual rivalries. I like Georgia-Auburn a lot. I like Tennessee-Alabama a lot, excuse me. And I love this Florida-LSU game. It gets really, it's senior year. But I just think LSU is going to have the talent advantage by a significant margin in this one. I like the Tigers on October 17th. October 24th versus South Carolina. Isn't that nice? They get a bounce back game in between Florida and Auburn. I like the Tigers on October the 24th as well versus the Gamecocks. They should be favored by a lot in that one. We're going to scroll down a little bit for those of you watching on video here as we now head into the back half of their schedule, which is significantly tougher than the first half. This is a hard stretch for the Tigers here. The back half of their schedule consists of Auburn, Alabama, Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss on here. So October 31st at Auburn. October 31st at Auburn. I like LSU to win that week. So video. No, I just paused it. I wasn't expecting you to come. Fucking say it if you weren't gonna be excited about it. No, I'm excited. I wasn't expecting.